Okay, let's get started. Good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, depending where you live. My name is Nico. I'm a product manager at Golem, and I'm going to be your host for the next 30 minutes. And we also have Alex, which is from Golem as well, which is connected to the live and he's moderating the chat box. So if at any point of that live session you're having questions, feel free to ask and he'll forward those to me, and we'll take some time after that session to make a question and answer session. So today's session is going to be about behavior triggers. So that's ways to get behavior started and stopped. Um, just to let people join, let me also give you a brief about what's coming up. So tomorrow we're gonna make like a production scene with perception and sensors, and we're gonna try to simulate kind of a pandemic motion graphics. You can see on the news all the time all those graphs of those particle simulation where they just spread viruses next to each other. So we're going to do exactly the same thing, but with actual 3D characters being animated properly. And next week we're going to do a session about traffic, and if we got some time we also try to merge that with some pedestrian and do a city block with traffic sim and crossings. And also we're gonna do a live session about the flock. So we're gonna make a bee and honey bee simulation, following some curves in 3D and avoiding in 3D. So let's get started with today's session and triggers. Before joining that live session, I actually made a scene with the fortress character. So let me maybe unbunk what's going on here. I created an entity type, which is using the soldier fortress character, which is part of the Golem character pack assets that we provide for free with the software. I assigned two types of rendering type here. So I assigned my sword and shield. So you can see some characters with the sword and the shield. So there are a couple of collisions here because they're not playing the proper animation, but that's not the point of today's session, so just ignore those. And I also assigned some arrow attackers, so that means I also am having some archery soldiers. So you can see that guy here is not having any shield and sword, is having only the arrow and the quiver on his back. So yeah, I just assigned those two types. I populated my scene with, let's see, 150 characters as a grid with some distance and some noise, but they're more or less like grid-like here. And I just assigned them with one motion, which is one motion from the character pack, which is the rest animation. So that's why they're just playing that rest animation, but it's obviously not convenient for the shield here. Probably we'll have to find another animation. So today's session is going to be about triggers. So here it means that all characters were doing the same thing, but what if under certain condition I would like some characters to do something else to start or to stop different behaviors? So you may remember from the previous session that we spoke a lot about behaviors and the way you graph those. We haven't spoke at all about triggers. So every time you're having a behavior here, it comes with two little arrows, one on the left and one on the right of that behavior. So those are what we call triggers. The one on the left is a start trigger. As soon as I double click on it, it opens the trigger editor panel right under, and it focuses me on the start trigger of that motion behavior. And if I double click on that one, it opens a new tab and presents me with another trigger. So there's one here for starting that motion. So when does that motion start? So let's take a look. When does it start? So the condition for it to start is defined by that node here. That node is what we call the Boolean trigger, and it can only output two values. It's just one parameter here. So when that checkbox is checked, it means that it always returns true. So should that motion start? And the answer is here, true, yes. So that motion always starts as soon as it's its turn to start. And let's take a look at should it stop. And the stopping trigger, the default stopping trigger, all the behaviors you're gonna play with are always the same. And here that guy is just the same trigger, but with a different parameter here. The true box here is unchecked, which means it's always returned false. So that means behaviors never stop by default. So that means that if I put another behavior next to that one, first I want them to play some out animation, and then I want them to maybe do some work animation. The only way to be able to start that animation is only by making sure that the stop trigger here is set. So let me set like here a new animation. So probably the cohort walk animation. Not sure if it's gonna be exactly the right animation for those kind of characters, but that's just for you to get the idea. And let me go into here and play. So if I play my sim, I shouldn't see anything different. If I pick a character, I can actually see what's going on. So that character here is playing that rest animation that I assigned him to, and you can see here is just playing that rest animation again and again and again and again. So it's really up to me here. So you have to see it as like maybe as a flow. So the way you read this is first the simulation starts from here, and it always tries to converge to the end of the simulation. So it always tries to exit behavior all the time. At every frame it's asking, can I get in? Or can I move right? So that guy here says, yes, you can move right, I can get into this. Can I exit? No, 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 no. And so it's here, it's up to you to change that trigger. It's kind of a door. So you have to decide the where you'd like to open the door. So what about those triggers? How do you set them? So you got the trigger library, which is here. So you got those 13 different nodes. We spoke about already that one, the true false one, which is the easiest one to get. And from the icon, you can get an idea of what kind of control you're having. So you can check for some randomness here. You can check for a frame, like a current time. Maybe at frame 100, you want something to happen. Also, you can check for a polygon zone, painted zone, so you can paint different colors, and depending on the colors you can like trigger some behaviors. Maybe check some distance, check some collisions, check some attributes per character, write some expressions as well, write some script, etc, etc. So we're gonna go through probably the most used triggers here, and also we're gonna go through some operators. So sometimes you would like to have a combination of triggers. Maybe you would like to have only characters which are within the zone at frame 100 to do something. So here it's going to be the combination of two triggers. It's going to be the frame trigger and the zone trigger. And notice the word I used, the small word I used was end. I want the frame and the zone. So that means you want to combine those, make a union of those two conditions, make them be sure that those two triggers are going to be true. So this is exactly the operator you want to use. You want to set those two behaviors and connect them to that AND operator. And we're having a couple of operators here. We're having a OR, so it can be only one or the other. The inverse of OR, which is called XOR. NOT, which is going to be the inverse of what's been computed previously. And one which is called accumulator, which is able to accumulate the result of the previous trigger amongst a bit of time. And let's see if we figure to find a good example to play with that one. So let's say I would like my character to start working at frame 100. So what I would like to set here is going to be the stop trigger. So let me rewind the simulation and go into my stop trigger. I can close the start one because I don't need it yet. And I'm going to drag and drop the frame trigger. And if you like take a closer look at what's happening here, you may see that that guy here, that frame trigger I just introduced, it's kind of looking transparent, where that one looks plain. And the false trigger also have like an arrow next to it, and that one doesn't have one. So what does it mean? It means that that guy here is not active yet. The idea here is that you can make, big graphs, pretty heavy graphs actually of triggers, connect them together to make a really huge condition system. And sometimes you would like only to evaluate some subparts of that system. So at any time you can decide and say to Golem that the part I would like to evaluate is that one here. So you can make multiple graphs and say which one is going to be active. And the way you set it as active is right-clicking on a node, any node, and set it as root. And you can see that as soon as you set it as root, it becomes active and that one disappears. So it's still here in the scene, but it won't be used anymore within the simulation. So the frame we would like to check here, so it's as always, it's a Maya node, so it has Maya attributes, and you can say, okay, I would like to check if the current time is equals, or you can check the sign, or is inferior or superior or different than. So here I want it to be equal to, let's say, frame 50. So for 50 frames, I'm gonna run the rest animation. Let's maybe rename that rest. And at frame 50, I want to go out and play what's next. So next is gonna be a walk animation. So I'm gonna rename this as a walk. Okay, so let's see how it goes. Let's close that maybe for a while, and let's take a look. So let's launch the simulation, take a look at the time. So for 50 frames, nothing go on. So maybe let me rescale that so we get a proper view of the time. So here we go. So let's play the first 50 frames, characters rest, and at frame 50, they start playing that walk animation. And once again, as the default trigger, stopping trigger for the walk animation is false, they just keep walking again and again and again and again until the end of the simulation. So, okay, you may have noticed that something which is not really interesting here is that they're all starting at the same time. So sure, those are soldiers, and soldiers are usually synchronized with each other, but you know, when you want to make crowd, you always want to have that kind of little organicity, adding some, you know, randomness of some fading to avoid having that behavior where 200 characters start something at the same time is not really realistic. So let's say you would like to fade that decision. So you would like first the time to be equals to 50 frames and fade that in. Maybe what you can do is bring a fade trigger. So fade trigger means that I'll be able to draw a curve which decide which characters, how many characters after this has been set as true, how many frames it will take for each character to get started. And I can draw a curve to say what are the chances that the character at the frame will get started. And the thing I want to do is first I want to evaluate that the frame is going to be 50, and actually what I want to do is evaluate if it's 50 or above, because if I only do frame 50, my fade will only be evaluated at frame 50, so that's not exactly what I want. And the fade, I want it to be evaluated after my frame is going to be frame 50. So what I can do is drag a link between my trigger and my fade. So now I'm going to check if the time is superior to frame 50. If yes, then before stopping that behavior here, let's fade. So let's add a bit of organicity. So let's take a look at how that fade trigger looks like. So first it has a duration. So how long would you like to fade that stopping? So probably 10 frames here won't be really noticeable. So I'm gonna add a 50 frames. So my characters will fade those two behaviors, will make a transition between those two behaviors amongst 50 frames. And here is what are the chances that at that frame 1 of that duration, my character is gonna stop. So I can say it's gonna be really low at the beginning, and at the end, what's gonna be the chance that my characters actually stop. So at the end of those 50 frames I set up into my duration, and maybe I can make a kind of non-linear curve here. So at the beginning there's little chance for my characters to get in, and as soon as I reach the end here, more and more will go through. So let's check how it goes now. So I still have my 50 frames of my character's rests, and here let's play frame by frame. We are frame 54, and you can see that they're still resting, and here and there's some characters which will start walking, and after 50 frames everybody starts walking. Okay, so that's actually pretty good. What if here, so maybe I'm having some characters here which are archery characters, and on the battlefield most of those guys they usually don't work. Well, they do work, but they on the battlefield they probably stay more or less on their position. So what if I would like to filter some characters? What if I would like only characters which are not archery soldiers to trigger that walk animation? Then the others maybe will trigger something else. That will be actually a good use case to introduce an operator. So here, my characters will stop resting after some time. I'm gonna stay like this, but I don't want all of them to walk. So what I probably will do is bring a new operator. So here, what it means that I want to branch my conditions. I want to have different behaviors. So I'm gonna probably like bring a new animation behavior here and set some archery specific animation. So I'm not sure where they are here. Shoot arrow. So okay, let's assign this and let's rename that behavior. So that will be like proper. Let's rename that behavior shoot arrow. Here, shoot arrow. And as you can see, that behavior is not active anymore, so it's going to be my my duty here to connect that to the graph. And it means that here, if some characters are non-archery, I want them to walk, and else, if they are archery, I want them to shoot. So here as well, notice when I try to explain this, I use the keyword if, and that's exactly what you want to use here, is the if operator. So let's bring that node in. And I can blend that node. I can put it here in the middle of the graph. And that guy here takes one entry, but has multiple outputs. And as an output, so I can use, once again, I can use middle mouse click to make a connection here between my if and my shoot arrow behavior. As soon as I bring that shoot arrow behavior link, you can see it becomes active. And to make it proper, I also make a connection to go out as well, so it brings me the exit operator, the exit trigger, sorry. And you may have noticed that when I drag and dropped that new link out of the if, now there's once again an arrow here with some number on top of it. So what's the meaning of this? So you may have noticed that if means that I want to check for a certain condition. So once again, conditions, those are triggers. You want to have something which returns true or false at a specific time to let you know what's your decision. So let's click on the if operator here and let's take a look at the attribute editor. So it gives you what's the sequence you're going to evaluate. So you're going to check if that trigger here returns true. You want to proceed with that branch of the graph. If and else, if it's not true, you want to go walking. So that walking will be the default choice if that guy here don't return true when it's evaluated. So it only be evaluated once. So when that guy stops, we're going to evaluate that trigger at that specific time. And if that guy is not true at that specific time, he'll switch to the walk shape behavior, which is there. So what I want to check here, what I want to set is the trigger which is related to this. And it has a number because I can have as many output lengths as I want to, and the number is going to be the order in which I'm going to evaluate the trigger. So first I'm going to evaluate that trigger here. Let's say there's another one. So if that guy returns true, we'll go there, else we're going to evaluate the next one, else the next one, else the next one, until someone returns true. And if no one returns true, we're going to default to the walk behavior. Sorry about that. Okay, so I want to set that trigger here. I want to check if my characters are going to be archery. So I'm double clicking on that arrow here, and it brings me a new trigger, which we can see here, a new trigger panel. And we can see here, it always returns true. So it means that if we play that behavior here, we'll have characters resting for 50 frames or more, kinda. And after 50 frames or more, they're gonna switch to that shoot arrow animation because the default trigger of the if said yes. So we're having all the characters, even the guys which having shield and arrows, which are like trying to fetch an arrow in their quiver and throw an arrow. So that's not exactly what we'd like to. So we'd like to filter. So one way to filter is probably to introduce another trigger here, which is called the expression trigger. And here what I want to check is what's the rendering type of my characters. Remember at the beginning I was exposing that my entity type soldier, I assigned it with two rendering types, one which was sword and shield attacker and the other which was arrow and bow attacker. So I want to fetch which rendering type they're having. So I'm using the expression trigger, and the expression trigger allows to fetch any attributes within Golem. I'll show you a list of what's available, and it's pretty extensive. I want to make this active, so I'm going to set it as root. And here, when I look at the attributes, you can see I'm having a kind of expression. And next to the expression, I'm having an helper that I can open, and now you can see all the attributes which are exposed within Golem. So you can check for what's the size of the character, what's his position, what's the position of any of the bones, what is he seeing, how close is he to enemies, is he in contact with something, is some behaviors running, not running. You're having really extended list, and amongst all that list, you're having one attribute which is called rendering type ID. So you can actually look for what's the rendering type of your character. So I'm double clicking on this, and I'm going to set that as rendering type ID, and I want to check if it's actually equivalent to some value being the rendering type of my arrow attacker. So what I want you to do is also check what's my rendering type ID. So this has been defined into the character file. Please refer to last week's sessions when we defined the geometry of the characters. This is exactly where I defined this. So here I'm just opening my character, bring in the geometry panel, and looking at all the rendering types that we've been defining with different weighting system. And here you can see sword and shield is going to be 0, arrow attacker is going to be 5. So here it means that within my behaviors, I want to check if my expression being rendering type is equal to 5. So that means my characters is of type of rendering type arrow. And now I can check the simulation here. Some characters will walk, some characters will shoot some arrows, and hopefully it's going to be the right one. So here it is. So you can see here my arrow soldiers, they're picking the arrow animation, whereas the other characters are picking the walk animation. So that's pretty good. Okay. Maybe what if I would like my characters which are within a zone to maybe walk and or maybe run as soon as they get into the zone. So that will be also a good use case. So here I would like only the characters which are walking to stop walking as soon as they are into the zone and start running when they are into that polygon mesh here. So first thing I want to do is to bring a new behavior. And I'm going to bring that behavior, putting it here. I want to, once again, rename that properly. So I'm going to name that run. And what I want to do is to plug that after my walk animation, because I only want my characters which are not some arrow soldiers to do that sequence here. And once again here, my default trigger for stopping is set to false, so they're never gonna go out of this. So let me just add maybe a run animation here. Run. Okay. Run long cycle, run spear. Well, let's stick with that one here. Who cares? And what I want to do is exit that behavior as soon as my characters are within the zone. So for that, I can use my zone trigger. Obviously, I can set it active as always. And what I want to use is that polygon plane, which is there. And I want to map it to my trigger zone, because if we take a look at the trigger zone, sorry, let's do that first. If we take a look at the trigger zone here, it's taking some polygons, so you can put multiple polygons here. So we need to map those two. So I'm gonna select my plane, which is the plane which is in the middle of my scene. I'm gonna press the Shift key, so it keeps my selection within the outliner and maps the two together. And as soon as they are mapped, now you can see that my plane appears here. Next, I have to decide if it's going to be a 2D checking or 3D checking. Just a quick word about that. 2D means that we don't really care that the plane is next or under the characters. What we're going to do is take the up axis of the characters, and we're going to throw a ray, really long ray into the two direction above and beyond. And if that ray hits the geometry, we're going to say, okay, that's true. So my characters are within the zone, so we can stop here. And you can also specify if you want to have like a 3D zone here. So 3D means that instead of checking if only the characters are within a surface, we're going to check if it's within the volume. So you can check if a character is within a box, for example, or within a sphere or any 3D primitive. So here it's a surface here, so I just want to have 2D. And also just an optimization here. If your vertices are going to be keyframed or animated or deformed, let's say you're doing a distraction or some effect simulation and you meshed that effect simulation and take that into account, and then it means that your vertices are changing at every frame. Yes, be sure that you check that box here. So as soon as I do that, now I can run my simulation, and I should have my characters not playing the walk animation at all as soon as they are within that zone. So they're gonna like start the walk but stop it like right away and start the run animation right away. So just quick note about that within the behavior graph. If the stopping trigger of a behavior is true, like when the behavior starts, that behavior will be skipped. And maybe to make my point, let's select a character here, and so we can see what's going on in terms of debug, and play the sim for a while. Up. Okay, sorry about that. The sound apparently disconnected as well. Again, sorry about that. Hopefully you haven't missed too much. So wait a minute, is it working? Yeah, it looks like it is. Hopefully it is. Okay. Apparently it is. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, as I was saying, let's maybe play. I hope, hopefully you haven't missed too much. I was just checking the behavior anyway, so it wasn't a big deal. So here, let's say I would like to include another trigger. In the last minute we're having, I want to play with maybe a final one, so that gives you an idea of what's going on here. And I want to, my characters now they're running as soon as they are within that zone, and let's say maybe when they are in collision with something, they just fall. So that will be probably a good use case to, when you do battles, it's pretty often that when you get hit by an arrow, your character is gonna fall or react to that fall. So once again, we're having a behavior to handle that kind of scenario, that kind of situation. So after probably my run animation, I would like first to, I would like to physicalize my characters. So that will be probably my first step here. So here I'm gonna put at the same time of the run, physicalize behavior. So Just a quick note about this. By default, and we're probably going to have a full sessions about how you make a battle scenes, and we're going to go into much more details about that. But when you want to make some physics simulation, by default, the golem entities, they're not physically enabled because the computation cost can be pretty high. So we don't enable that by default because most of the situations don't require that. So it's up to you to define that you want your characters to be physicalized at some point, and you want to that physicalized behavior means that you're enabling the physics component of those characters. And you got multiple ways of enable it. Maybe you're saying that your characters are going to be dynamic, and once again, we'll have a full online sessions about that. But dynamic means they're going to be ragdoll. Servo means that they'll be controlled by animation, but still be physicalized and apply some gravity. Or kinematic means that here we're just entering the physics word, but the physics word doesn't have any influence on the character, so they're just gonna keep playing the animation again and again. But by doing so, now my characters will exist into the physics world, and I'll be able to check for collisions and to react when my characters are going to be in collisions with something. So let's do that actually. So here what we want to do is probably, so here that behavior just change the status of your character, so you can stop it right away. So I'm gonna play here with the trigger and set it to true. So that behavior gonna just change the status of my character by setting up into the physics. And here my run animation will run until some collision happens. So probably let's add a new object in the scene which will act as a collider. So let's make a box, for example, and let's maybe put it here, change its size, so white 8, okay, and depth. Here we go. So I want it to make it like a collider, so I'm gonna select that box here, and I'm gonna click on that button here, which is the crowd rigid body, which just tells that this is gonna be a collider for the physics engine. Now it exists. You can see those white lines next to it, but we'll have a full, once again, we'll have a full session about it. And I want to stop my run animation as soon as I hit that box. So the stop trigger here, it's gonna be my physics collision trigger. I'm gonna set it as root, and let's take a look at the interface, which is a bit weird. So you can add a filter, so you can decide how your trigger looks like. So what I want to check if I'm colliding either a specific object which has a specific physics mode, or a specific object which is having an ID, and I'll show you how that ID looks like. Or a color. You can actually color everything which is going to be physicalized, and I actually colored some pieces of my characters. And also a kinetic value, so you can check how strong, and you can react only if it's strong enough, so you can check what we call the kinetic value. So here, let's check within my scene what we're having. So let's close this. We're having that crowd rigid body. It has a collision ID of 0, so let's change that for 666. Random number. And what we want to check if it's the ID of what we're colliding with. So collision side is going to be the collider, so you can check if my what do we like to check? Do we like to check if it's you, the entity, or if it's an external object? So you want to check for a collider, which is going to be rigid body collision ID. So rigid body is the kind of object I just created as an ID of that random number I used. And now it means that my run animation will stop as soon as it collides physically with that behavior. The physics collision, they happen on what we call the physics shape. So my characters are approximated within the physics world as capsules, boxes, and that kind of stuff. And now if I run the sim, I should get my characters standing for 50 frames or so. Then the characters which are within the plane starts running, and characters which will physically hit that box will stop running. Hopefully, here it is. And we haven't defined anything about them, so they just stop running. Probably you're expecting them to fall or to do something. So let's add some behaviors on top of that. And also maybe I can try something. So you see here my characters, they're partly green and partly red. That's because before that session I probably maybe wanted to make some filter based on color, well, I'll probably do that in a different scenario, but let me tell you how you can use this in a casual use case. When you make a battle scenes, some parts of the body, I mean, if the shield or the spears touches that box, the characters will not like fall or will not like die. Or if it takes an arrow only in the arms or in the legs or in some specific parts of the body, you don't want that trigger to react. So maybe what you'd like to do is define what are the vital parts or maybe the critical parts of the character, which as soon as they get collided, you would like them to react. So this is why I colored the head, the neck, the chest, and the stomach. So here I could say only if you hit into that part, I would like you to actually do something. So you can filter those collisions based on colors and colors of collisions. And that's exactly the same also with the rigid body. The rigid body is here, it's going to be just gray, but you can change that color. You can say, okay, if you collide with a red object within the scene, like physically collide, I want you to react. So I said maybe you would like them to fall. So if you'd like them to fall, probably we'll bring another physics behavior next to that. And now we'll set it as dynamic. So it's going to be just a ragdoll here. And as my run animation just stopped and my physics behavior stopped as well, the parallel operator will also stop and they will go out and probably fall now and probably collide with the box. So let me maybe select that guy here so we can see it. So right now he's running the running behavior. That physicalize has been stopped from the first frame it went into. And as soon as here it will collide, you can see here that guy is finishing and now it's switching to the physics. And oh, sorry, I should stop that behavior right away. As I did before, I need to stop it right away. That's the way that physicalized behaviors works. It's a state changer, and the state only changes when it goes out. So you need to make it go out. So sorry about that. That's a newbie error here. Shame on me. So yeah, here we go again. So while I'm running that simulation, probably for the last time, feel free to put your questions. And we're going to handle a quick Q&A. And now we're having characters falling. So some are going, through the collider here. Mostly I would love to change the sub-steps for it not to happen properly. And you can see they're completely ragdolled. No, so not really realistic. Here as well, we probably will have to play an animation at the meantime because ragdoll is not really realistic. That's something you want to do only, for... for maybe arrow characters or for maybe rigid characters, but for dynamic organic characters, that's not something you want to use, so you want to probably merge that with some animation. So we're going to speak about this in much more details when we're going to go through the battle session. So, okay, let's check for any questions. And in the meantime that I'm looking for questions, feel free to say where you're from, guys. So here I'm from France, from the small city of Rennes in Brittany, northwest of France. Okay, let's go. Can I recycle? Okay, so let me go through the beginning of the chat box. Okay, so there's a question from Eduardo. Apparently, that's the first one. Can I recycle the same trigger graph on different behaviors, or should I recreate it each time? So that's excellent questions, actually. I should have probably explained that, but each behavior, all of them here, I set into my scene, even the F operator. They're having something. They're also always having a panel called the triggers attribute, and you can see here. You can see what's the name of the trigger which is connected as the start trigger and what's the name of the trigger which is connected as the stop trigger. And here you could say, let's maybe change something in my graph, and let's say, you know what, I really like that, let's say that run stop animation with the collision one. So you can go here into your motion behavior and say, okay, that stopping trigger I'm using on the run, I want to have it exactly the same. So here it's called run stop trigger shape 1. So I want to use as a stop trigger run stop trigger shape 1. So now they're shared. And even better is that when you click on it, when you select it, you can see within your graph which other triggers it's shared with. So it's a good idea to get it's a good way to get an idea of how your triggers are going to be used into your scene. Actually, for performances reason, we totally recommend to share triggers because it means that it's going to execute it and compute it only once, and the result will be shared amongst behaviors rather than re-executing the same code for every single entity. So yeah, that's excellent question here, and that's a good chance for me to explain that because it also has a big impact on performances if you do some heavy graphics. Okay. Hello from Greece. Can we change the physics if it is available? How? So I mean, well, I guess you mean the physics. Well, the physics can mean plenty of different properties here, but for sure it's fully customizable here. I won't go into too much detail into that session because we're gonna have a session about physics and battles in probably 2 weeks or something. But yeah, there's plenty of ways to control the physics. So you can control first the physics of the characters. So that's the way the characters is approximated here. And actually that way is defined into the character maker. So when you go within the character maker, within the skeleton part, there's something called the physics properties. And if you press edit, you end up with a complete array of what's the different properties of your character's physics. So you can define how you'd like to approximate each bone that you like. So here, let's say I didn't want to approximate each single finger bones, so I just approximate the end as just like a box like this. And you can define, so we'd like to have a capsule, a box, or a sphere. What's going to be the density or the mass of your object. I mean, a shield is going to be way heavier, so it's going to have a bigger density than human flesh, so you can change that. What's going to be restitution, fraction, damping, the joint limits as well, because an elbow doesn't fold in every single direction. So for realism, you want to make sure that elbow only fold into one direction, so you can specify the joint limits. And at the end of that panel, you're having the color control. So this is where I've been specifying that I wanted to have red onto the root bone, the stomach, the chest, and the neck and the head. So here I just, for the neck here, I just decided I wanted to have some red color, and that red color can be used afterwards for collisions filtering. You can obviously control, like I did, the environment. So here I just created one rigid body, which was that box. So you can add, you can bring multiple meshes and say that's going to be more colliders, and maybe those colliders are either kinematic. So kinematic means that they won't be influenced by the simulation. They're here and they're not moving, so they're walls or buildings or really static objects. You can also say they're going to be dynamic objects, so when characters hit them, they're going to react to that as well. And maybe also finally what I can tell is within the physics locator. So when you do some physics, you end up with a new node called the physics locator. You can define what's going to be the gravity of your characters, how many substeps you want to have, what's going to be frictions, the way the ragdoll is going to be solved. You got plenty of controls upon that. Can we do that characters look side but go forward? Yeah, sure. That's a behavior I haven't really spoke about since the beginning of those sessions, but let's go back into I'm not sure if I can't remember if I actually used it. But let's say you want to have maybe only the arrow soldiers to look at some specific position. Maybe I would like them to, so the question was, I want them to look side. Okay, let's say I would like them to look on their right side. Independently from their orientation, I would like them to look right on their right side. So what I can do is probably bring a new behavior. And within that new behaviors next to the shoot arrow, so let me remove that guy here. I want, at the same time that I'm shooting arrows, I want to look at somewhere. So I can bring a look at behavior here, and I'm gonna put within the same position. So it's gonna create a parallel operator, which means I'm gonna shoot and at the same time look at. So there's gonna be procedural look at here. Let's take a look at what's gonna be the setup into this. So it's asking me for a target locator. So I'm gonna create a Maya locator here. I'm gonna put this, I'm not exactly sure what's gonna be the axis here. So I'm gonna put it into on the right side of the characters, next to the head, at the height of the head. So it means that I'm gonna ask for a relative positions between the axis, the root axis of the characters and that locator. So I'm gonna map that locator within the look at. Oops, sorry, I selected the wrong behavior here. So once again, I'm using the shift key to select both within the viewport and the behavior here. So I'm going to map those. The target mode is going to be relative. So relative means that I'm going to look what's the relative position based on the root bone of my characters. And the bone name I would like to adapt is going to be probably the head. So I'm going to check for the head bone. And now maybe let's have less frame here as well, so we can fetch that behavior. Well, you know what, even better, let's erase that behavior. We don't really care about this. So let's remove that rest from the beginning so we can test right away. Okay, so that's definitely not the right position here. So that's not the right axis, but you can see the character is definitely looking to something. So probably it means that the direction in which I should look is more something like this. Let's take a look. And if it's not, it's probably going to be the opposite. And here we go. Okay, so now you can see the characters are shooting into one direction, but they're looking, so here is not exactly on the side, probably I will have to shift it a bit, but here they're looking into in different positions because we're using that look at to override the head position there. Another question, can I read texture or UV information on triggers to have a behavior triggering when the character is walking over a green area, or different behavior when on top of a blue? Totally. So two ways to actually achieve that. We're having one which is called the paint zone trigger. So probably let's play with that one. Yeah, let's play with that one. You know what? I would like my characters to shoot. So what's my F zone here? Oh, it's actually changed. Okay. I would like my characters to actually shoot only if they are within a different specific color. So we're having something called a painted zone trigger. So here it means that you're going to use and paint with a golem object, within a golem object with a golem tool. So here I'm bringing the paint zone, and the way you control the paint zone is by using the paint tool. So let's go into that plane here. Let's make sure that everything is frozen. So let's freeze transformation first. And now I can go into my paint tool. I can say I want to paint a trigger zone. So I'm going to the trigger zone. So you can paint different stuff. You can paint vector fields, PP attribute, entity types, plenty of different attributes. That one is for trigger zones. So I can create a new trigger zone, which is going to be based onto that polygon here. I can decide of a color. Let's bring that red color again. And let's say I would like only my characters which are within that red color. So you can control that as any paint tool you're having within Maya. So here my characters, when they're going to be into the red zone, I would like them to play that behavior. So I'm going to go into here, into my trigger zone, and say the trigger zone I want to evaluate is going to be that one I just created, painted zone 1, and I want to check for if the color is red. And only if the color is going to be red, my characters will play that behavior, else the rest will walk. So you can see only the characters which are within the zone started by playing that behavior. And those characters, they are into the red, but they're that trigger gets evaluated at the first frame, because this is the first stuff we evaluated. That behavior here has been removed. So simulation starts, and at the first frame it asks, Are you in the red zone? No. Else you go there. You got obviously ways to stop that graph if when they're in the zone, red zone, they do something else. But just so you understand that even when the characters reach the red zone, they already went and picked that choice. So there's no way that they can go back into that choice here. It's up to you to redesign your behavior graph to take that into account. And just a side word about that as well, we can also use less than and greater than, and here within that context of colors, it means that we're going to use the U value of that color. So yellow is lesser than orange, which is lesser than red, which is lesser than purple. So we're using the U value to specify if something is lesser or greater. So that's the paint zone trigger. And if you want to use Maya texture nodes as well, you can also use the texture trigger. And within that texture trigger, you have to specify what's the mesh you want to use to fetch the UV setups. What's the texture node you want to fetch, and that one will evaluate the texture node from Maya. And once again, you're going to compare that to some color with some thresholds, and it's going to be the same difference. In the same way, we're going to evaluate the color, so lesser or greater depending on the U. Okay. So if you haven't done so, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you know about the next sessions and when they get started. Once again, next week we're going to have a session about traffic. We're going to make a full traffic system with cars. And if I got time, I'll also try to include some pedestrians and also a flock session. So we're going to make some bees flying around, perching on some beehive, and some procedural animation for the wings. And obviously tomorrow we'll have a sessions about some pandemic spreading amongst characters. So we're going to use perception, channel operators to do some more complex, bit more complex behavior setup. And it's going to tomorrow's session will rely on everything we've seen so far, so all the behaviors, the locomotions, the triggers. So if you've been following all the previous sessions, make sure to catch up because we'll assume that those are have been understood, and we'll only go through the perception. Thank you again for following us, and as I was kind of saying, so next week's session, flock and traffic, and the after that we're gonna go into a battle session. So we're gonna make 4 courses battles. So we're gonna make archery soldiers, hitting characters with some physics, formations, charging armies, and how you combine all those tiny behaviors, soldiers within the same scene. So we're gonna have a 4 sessions amongst 2 weeks about battles. So stay tuned. In the meantime, stay safe, and see you tomorrow.